Hello everyone, welcome back to some more Star Citizen. My name's Bob Mitch. This video is going to have some gameplay elements and most importantly story elements from the upcoming 4.2 patch. So with that in mind, this could be a potentially spoilery video for you if you've not been involved in the PTU and are waiting for that content to come to live. I wanted to get that out of the way first, so with that done, narrative. It's something that's been missing-ish from Star Citizen for a very long time because it's been very hard to isolate story elements in a game that's essentially barely a game right now and is more of an interactive tech demo. That isn't to say the development team isn't trying, so with Align and Mine or Supply and Die we've had incidences of pirates coming over, like the Headhunters and the so-called Freedom Fighters who are actually the Slicers, coming from Pyro to Stanton, causing a whole load of trouble, stealing Polarises. However, the story elements are kind of up in the air because at the minute we don't have in-game cutscenes. Everything that we see happening in the universe currently happens from this weird sort of pseudo Gordon Freeman-like perspective where we see it more with our eyes, we see news articles, we see things happening in front of us, we only get snippets from the Moby-Glass and all those various elements, so posters, different screens littered around the universe. Sometimes elements on the website if you go into the lore, but we haven't really gotten into the gist of seeing it in a traditional MMO kind of sense. With 4.2, however, this changes a little bit, and whilst we still don't have in-game cutscenes, we do have a little bit more of a sensational, interactive narrative experience in the form where we see things that are a little bit more interconnective, and we have sound bites. You have to go looking for them. They aren't exactly hard to find, though they might be a little bit harder to listen to with the ambient audio going on. So in this video I've tried to isolate those a little bit, the best I can with everything that's going on in the madness that's currently the PTU, and extrapolate them, or just rather collate them, so that I can put them in this video and put them together and make sense of it for you if you're into the lore, like I am. To start with though, I'm not going to jump straight into what is 4.2. We have to take a step back a couple of patches to the initial big story arc that CIG have implemented, which is the regeneration crisis. So I'd imagine most of you, if you're playing the game, have been paying attention in the news article loading screens and everything that's been coming up. You can see snippets of this regeneration crisis story taking place where the citizens in the UEE aren't regenerating. Now, regenerating in-game is our player's way and humanity's way in this universe of cheating death, so that when we die, we go back, and almost like EVE Online, where the Capsuleers have their snapshot of their brain is fried in the process at the moment of their death, and then they wake up in a fresh clone body. We have a similar but not exactly the same process here. So to kind of explain that narrative a little bit, because one of the other elements from it is particularly important as we get to the audio, I'm going to go a little bit into the explanation of regeneration. So from the Star Citizen Tools website, like the wiki, essentially regeneration is a medical process which enables the total restoration of an individual after death. The process includes getting an imprint created at a local hospital, with repeated regeneration eventually resulting in total death/wiping. So it's not something you can do endlessly. Regeneration is not without danger or limits. Grievous injuries sustained prior to death can create traumatic response echoes, TREs. These echoes recall vestiges of mortal injury within the person's imprint, causing future generations to bear the scars of past traumas regardless of how otherwise healthy a person's imprint is. Age carries over between regenerations by a similar means, and damage accrued after each successful regeneration steadily degrades the integrity of a person's imprint, a process measured by their imprint viability score, IVS, and once a person's score drops too low, they are incapable of regenerating and are wiped, suffering true death. This technology is originally taken from the Vandal process, and the process was further refined by a Dr. Aka Ibrahim and Bioticorp. Regeneration relies on the use of an Ibrahim sphere, a sophisticated medical tool which stores a comprehensive bioscan or imprint of an individual by combining these two technologies. A unique copy of an individual can be constructed after their death, one that is in nearly all aspects identical to the source. So that's the little bit of background, and the most important thing out of all of that is these things called Ibrahim spheres. So the little tidbit on what we have about an Ibrahim sphere is this. Capable of storing virtually every detail of the individual mind and body, Ibrahim spheres are at the heart of the regeneration process. These machines and the imprints within are unique to an individual. Only one can store a person's imprint at any given time, and attempts to surpass this limitation have always ended in failure. How the Ibrahim spheres maintain their connection to the individual is not yet known, and scientists have compared the faster-than-light response of an Ibrahim sphere following an imprinted person's death to the instantaneous nature of quantum entanglement. So, like in EVE Online, as I explained, when somebody dies, there's some form of instantaneous communication between the dying person and this sphere, and then they wake up in not a nice new shiny clone, because in EVE Online we have clones that are essentially brand new bodies that people never die in EVE. You just get a new body and that's it. Whereas in Star Citizen, because of the trauma, you may need prosthetics and things because you still have that trauma from your previous death. Now, these Ibrahim spheres are important because in the current overarching storyline, something is going wrong with them. They're breaking, they're failing, and essentially because of this, people aren't regenerating and they are dying. If you go to any of the hospitals currently in Stanton, then you'll see that there are people queued up outside and they're getting very angry at the staff. They're shouting, they're demanding to see managers, and they're getting very upset because they've lost relatives and so on. One of the newspaper articles in the current patch was about somebody who'd lost both their sons because they didn't regenerate properly. The Ibrahim sphere process had broken down and they both died. And now this leads us into 4.2. Now in 4.2, everyone knows about the giant Valikar that everyone's going to kill on Pyro 1, and when you kill this giant angry Valikar, you get pearls. So with these pearls, there is some kind of experimentation going on in these facilities with the scientists in these ASD facilities that you've seen in my previous video and in the teasers and things that are coming up, that you're going to visit. And not just for the sake of the Valikar, you'll go to these facilities because you need to get radiation suits, you need to go to them to get data key cards and lab key cards and maintenance key cards if you want to use things like the Atlas IT keys that are around Pyro 1. And in the process of getting these items or just exploring the facilities in general, you'll visit these laboratories. In these laboratories, or specifically 3 of them, there are essentially like digital dictation machines lying around. So I work in a hospital environment and the doctors there have these little talky things like microphones that they can speak into at their computers, essentially just a microphone connected to a clever piece of software where they can dictate patient notes, and the scientists at these facilities have a similar piece of technology. If you go back and look at them, you'll see when I put these clips up, you can interact with them and listen to what the scientists are saying. In this case, it's 2 different scientists for the 3 sound bites that we have. It's Dr. Yorrit, spelt Jorrit, who is the leader of these facilities. He seems to be the brains behind this entire operation of irradiating the Valikar in order to take them down and use their pearls for science in general, and as well as fixing the regeneration crisis and other work that we'll get into. The second scientist is a person called Amanda Preston, who just seems to be one of the scientists who's working with Dr. Yorrit and seems to be working under him and is involved in the whole process. So that's a brief explanation, and now I'll put the audio clips up and we'll have a little talkie with those. So our first soundbite is from Pyro 4, one of the facilities on Pyro 4. There is 10 of them, and all of them have a laboratory inside which you need to access using a lab coat. Previously, I don't know if this is still in the case, you were able to do so by dragging a scientist, as you can probably see me doing in this poor video with this lady that I'd knocked out and are dragging around. Or you can make the choice to take off all your armour and put a lab coat on yourself and go and stand in front of the scanner. Once you're inside, you can find her dictaphone on the table side and you can listen to her audio, and this is what she has to say.
Test. Okay, it's recording. Preliminary results look promising. Ibrahim spheres enhanced with irradiated pearl dust are showing better entanglement outcomes than what we're seeing with the normal ones. Dr. Yorrit's already given clinical the go-ahead to start in vivo testing, but I'm not confident we're at that stage yet. I want to replicate this a dozen or so times before we move on to development. We don't have enough data yet to say this is statistically significant. I wanted to get this on record, in case Dr. Yorrit keeps pressuring us to rush things. Still, I'm feeling hopeful. Maybe we can solve the regen crisis. Not bad for a weapons company.
So, as you can hear, she's been working with the Valikar pearls and evidently crushing them down into dust, and using this dust to perform experiments, and from what she's seen, the entanglement effect of using this dust on the Ibrahim spheres is producing promising results, and she believes that the work that they're doing can solve the regeneration crisis, and that's her first little part in this story. The next part comes from Dr. Yorrit himself, and his soundbite comes from his office, which is at the main facility on Pyro 1. This office, to get into, as I demonstrated in my last video, you read the periodic table through the window in the infirmary, and you can use the two highlighted elements as numbers to get in as the code. Once again, his dictaphone is on the table in the centre of his office, and once you click his dictaphone, this is what you hear.
Personal journal, entry 7. I managed to get a workable pearl into the machine and started running it through a spectrum of wave types. Mostly nothing, as expected. But something seems to be happening when agitating the photons of both the imprinted Ibrahim sphere and the extraction of the pearl. I'm not sure what it means. The scans are triggering some anomalous energy signatures. What is this? Let me try running it against the sample I brought from the other lab. Oh, glorious! The reaction is stronger. My initial hypothesis that irradiated Valikar pearls could help stabilize the Ibrahim sphere connections seems to be correct. But I think its true value lies with my other work. I must get back to my real lab and see what this means.
So, as you can hear from Dr. Yorrit, you can hear that he also thinks that the work that they're doing can solve the Ibrahim sphere problem and thus the regeneration crisis. However, it's important to note with his audio, he is involved in some kind of other work, air quotes, that we don't have any information about right now, as well as another facility. Whether this is sinister or if he's doing something else, this is obviously going to branch off into another storyline, but this is clearly not the last that we're going to hear from Dr. Yorrit. I think he's going to be a character that's going to take him further forward. Whether Amanda is also involved, we'll have yet to see. Our final audio comes from the specimen lab inside the Pyro 1 facility. So inside the specimen lab, it's where you insert the specimen card that you get from the Pyro 4 facility that allows you to withdraw one of the viable eggs, starts this whole mad firefight for a few minutes whilst the egg is retrieved, and then once you have it, you can take it to the calling tower and call the giant Valikar. Inside the specimen lab, on the bench on one side, there is another dictaphone, and this one introduces both characters and a conflict emerges, as you will hear.
Alright. Hello? Here we go. Problem. Currently utilising the death cries of Valikar larvae to summon and harvest irradiated apex. Obviously, there are moral issues with this approach. Hypothesis. By using some recordings I made, I believe we could synthesize the same sound without the need to cause unnecessary pain. I just finished some initial testing and was finding encouraging solutions.
This facility is not currently in operation. Unauthorized access is
Hello.
strictly forbidden.
Who are you?
Amanda Preston, sir.
What are you doing?
Oh, I was hoping to put together an official presentation, but I think I found a way for us to summon the Apex Valikar more effectively.
We have a way.
Well, so we wouldn't have to destroy the eggs to do
They're
this.
worms.
But
They're worms. And you have real work to do.
yes, sir.
As you can hear in this audio, Amanda has found a more humane way of trying to summon the worms for the process, so rather than destroying the egg to call the adult Valikar out, she thinks that she can replicate the noise that's made to withdraw them. This is kind of a different law change from how we were originally going to do it, because when we saw the video of the worm being attacked on Daymar, it was essentially almost like Dune, where we could just make loud noises on the surface with sand, with things like cyclones and atlases, and it would irritate the worms and they would burst out. Here they're taking the egg and smashing it, which creates some kind of sound that radiates and calls the worm up. Amanda, it appears, has found some kind of way to replicate that sound. She's trying to work on this, and Dr. Yorrit interrupts her and says that this is silly because we already have a way. He obviously doesn't care about the moral implications of what's going on because they're just worms and it's not important. Now, we don't know, of course, if we'll see more of these characters. Like I said, I think Dr. Yorrit will be involved more in the future, and there isn't really much way in the way of lore with it. There's a couple of screen items, if you look at the various terminals around the facilities, about the delivery of the Valikar eggs. And if you look at one in particular of the maintenance and security guys, you can see that the manager is not very happy because one of the staff sold the Atlas Ikti to some Randu Banant merchantman, who has then modified them and started to sell them as his own. No credits for guessing who that might be. These are the only sort of interactive elements in it, but I still think it's a very cool thing because it's introducing a little bit more narrative. Whilst we don't have cutscenes, as I said, it doesn't seem to go any further yet, but it's still very early storyline. This whole regeneration crisis going forward evidently is going to be the big story arc. We already know, if you've been reading the roadmap updates, that there's going to be another big event soon-ish, kind of like Supply or Die, that's going to involve all of the shards collectively. And I think this is going to be a crux part of it, maybe not quite the climax of this regeneration crisis storyline, so I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. Within the story itself, I've already explained in my previous video that it's very clear that what's going on at these facilities and the opportunity to interact with the worms and defeat them, even in this giant arena that's been made full of radiation and irradiated worms and irradiated copium and just so many hazards in general in this giant set piece stage of an arena where we're fighting. It looks incredible, but I think it's important to note, as I said in my last video, that when we're fighting these Apex Valikars, this one in particular that we're fighting at this facility is not at its full strength as they should be. This worm is a science experiment and it's sick, it's radiated, it's essentially full of cancer because of the radiation that's been affecting it. That's why it has lots of weak spots. And they are being farmed. I suppose in some kind of element it might make it stronger, but in a lot of others it's made it weaker. So if you've seen any of the PTU fights, you'll know that this doesn't seem very long to kill, at least from what I've seen. And we need to remember that this isn't Big Daddy Worm. And I imagine when we do get to fight the worms on Monox and Daymar, they'll be a lot more difficult to kill and probably need the full facilities of ships and ground vehicles and God knows what else, like we've seen in that video, that you can throw at it, because they will be a lot stronger and harder to kill. I feel this is just very much an introductory fight to what's going to be an ongoing threat within the Star Citizen universe from here. So, story elements out of the way, what do I think? I like the story, and I like the idea of the narrative. What I don't like, trying to provide some constructive feedback, is that to make this grandstanding PvE piece in the middle of a gigantic combat zone clusterfuck. And I get it, a lot of Star Citizen is about combat. Most of Star Citizen is about combat, let's face it. Space combat, FPS combat, it's there and it's not going away. And we simply don't have the mechanics in game for a lot of things like data scanning, data running, all the enhanced mining and salvage, blah blah blah. They just aren't there yet. Which is why I feel when I was watching the video of the new encounter on Inside Star Citizen, the new one called Into the Storm that released the other day, I feel it was really disingenuous to call this exploration gameplay. There is exploration involved in this, don't get me wrong. There's exploring the labs when you go there the first time, learning the layouts to go and find the bits and pieces. But it's not exploration gameplay. It isn't. It's somewhere you're going to explore for going there for a purpose, and that purpose is to kill the worm. This is not somewhere that you can take your Carrack out and go and explore, or take your Exploration 600i to go and explore a map. This is not exploration in the sense of what people think exploration is in Star Citizen. This is going to scout a location, get the elements needed to kill the worm whilst trying to avoid everyone else that's also there doing the same thing in a lawless combat PvP mess, whilst trying to avoid the Idrises and Polari that are falling out of the sky because of the distortion damage from the storm that's overhead. And that's to say they're the ones who failed because the clever people had been keeping the Idrises in orbit and firing lasers and railgun ordnance from above the storm itself to kill the worm. I know that instance content is coming, and I know it's probably a long way off, and as such we're probably going to have to sit through several more repeats of this kind of combat, because in Pyro it's completely lawless, and there isn't really that much of a justice system in Stanton to prevent the same kind of level of PvP occurring. For the longest time at the Hathor facilities, people would just get away with flat out murder, and it's only recently that the PvP bounty system has started working again, so that if people do have a crime stat, then there are of course those dedicated bounty hunter players who love going out and farming them for 150k credits a pop. But like I said, this is very, very recent. Unfortunately, in this case, with Hathor, it's too little too late, because it's slowly fading into the background because of this new event. That's not to say that people aren't going to do Hathor. In fact, I imagine quite a lot of people will carry on doing it, because now they get to experience it, because they don't have these gigantic organisations locking down the content, because instead they're going to the new area to lock down the worm in a new lawless gigantic PvP arena clusterfuck. I know it sounds like I'm having a moan, and I am having a little bit of a moan, but I also understand that currently in Engine, with the development stages that we're at, this is more or less what they can do and what the game is capable of. And I feel that they tried to go in a more heavy kind of PvE kind of direction, but Stanton had already had its big shiny event, and Pyro was there and missing things, looking very pretty, felt a little bit underutilised, and Pyro 1 was there with its giant storms as the perfect stage for something like this. Unfortunately, Pyro is lawless, so something like this was always going to happen. So the PvE guys had their fantastic idea with a very cool narrative, but then combat had to get involved, and combat is needed outside of trying to use the combat to kill the giant worm. So here we are. Like I said, it's not something I like outright, but I understand why it is the case, and unfortunately it's just another case of waiting until there are extra features in the game like the instance content that are more like a traditional MMO. As is always the case with Star Citizen, we just have to be patient. Hopefully you understand the story a little bit more now, and I've managed to lock it down a little bit so you understand what's going on, if so far you've been unable to on the PTU, because you've been blown away by an FS9 as soon as you landed. That is, if you were fortunate enough to be able to land, because the solo Idris pilot wanted to test how long your spaceship in particular could withstand his size 10 laser. Hopefully in live it'll be a little bit easier to play, because the players will be spread out on the shards and it'll be a little bit more manageable. Sadly, only time will tell. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please give the video a like, and please subscribe if you fancy sticking around. If you're new to the game or haven't made an account yet, you can use the referral code on screen, also in the video description, to give yourself some in-game credits and give me a little boost as well. See you in the next one.